time is around the end of the 1990s. Japan was suffering the worst economic depression in the post-war era. This caused chain reaction bankruptcies, increasing rates of unemployment, and unbelievably heinous crimes committed by youths. It was a time and place that was suitably described by the phrase, the end of the century.
If you were to ask someone for a description of the 1992 Super Famicom RPG Shin Megami Tensei, they might say it's about the cyberpunk pre- and post-apocalypse at the hands of resurrected demons from mythological lore, with a young boy destined to bring peace to the world. This is an entirely accurate portrayal of Shin Megami Tensei. However, this is a surface-level description, the campy element of it designed to draw an audience into its deeper meaning. Although it might not sound like it, the world of Shin Megami Tensei is a deliberate echo of 20th century Japan. For many nations, the 20th century was an exceptionally turbulent time of social and cultural upheaval. Nations at the start of the 20th century hardly seem reflective on their modern-day counterparts. No truer does this ring than with Japan, where the warping in government and culture is so drastic that it hardly seems possible that it occurred. Through such turbulence, what can be said for the Japanese identity? What is the true image of Japan to the average citizen? The exploration of this question can be found within Shin Megami Tensei. The game itself doesn't explore the concept of the Japanese identity, it asks you to explore it. The game doesn't have any true villains, just people with ideologies. The two major factions of the game, though, label themselves as Law and Chaos. These factions act as manifestations of real-world elements that are both part of Japanese society, but at the same time, forces of destabilization. The faction of Chaos is a multifaceted one. One of the central figures of Chaos is Self-Defense Force Commander Goto, who is a sort of avatar of the real-world author Yukio Mishima. The similarities they share are in their traditional and nationalist sentiments, and the fact that both men stage a coup. Other tangible elements such as their physical appearance and the parallel of both men exhibiting a rousing speech to accompany their coup. Mishima is one of the most complex figures of the 20th century, so it is solely the previously mentioned elements that influence Goto's makeup and nothing more. The overall visual theme of Chaos is highly Asiatic, with very little Western imagery. Chaos figures frequently cite the ideals of absolute freedom, in opposition to Law's more autocratic paradigm and entanglement with religious faith. In a way, you could interpret this attitude as somewhat liberal in nature. This ties in with the sexual element that some demons and figures of Chaos display, which is a trait that Law does not exhibit. Speaking of Law, they serve as the opposing force to Chaos. The faction serves as a manifestation of Western, specifically American, influence on Japan.
With apparently no sense of the incongruous, the Japanese continue to imitate the West. And superficially at least, the country looks increasingly Western.
A key moment in the story is when American troops occupy Japan in order to thwart Goto and his Chaos forces. The historical American occupation of Japan in real life and its subsequent military presence after occupation is a fairly contentious issue, stemming from the series of crimes committed by American servicemen from the onset, and the question of the necessity of such a military presence its size. Back in the game, the American forces are all too ready to launch a nuclear strike on Japan, in which they do so. I shouldn't have to explain the history and the fears associated with such an act on Japan. Christianity is also a fundamental element of the Law faction, with Christian iconography a key trait of Law. The image of Law and its many key figures consist mostly of biblical figures, and their appearance is emblematic of the European interpretations of them. Shinto and Buddhism have shaped the culture and landscape of Japan, so the impact of foreign Christianity and its completely different rules and codes could be viewed as a source for societal disruption. The game makes an interesting correlation between American nuclear attack and Jehovah's Great Flood in the Bible, suggesting that there is an equivalence in the attitudes behind the action. In a way, Shin Megami Tensei presents that biblical adages have influenced the West's attitude and approach. Important Law figures such as Thor and Vishnu may seem as if they don't fit into this mold, but they are somewhat comparable to Christian figures. I stress somewhat, as they are not copies of Christian figures. However, in my opinion, they share enough similarities in their stories or their attitudes to see why they were included as figures of lore. To summarize, chaos equals the Asiatic, Japanese nationalism, but also elements of liberalism. Lore equates to the glorification and worship of Western ideals, as well as a touch of conservatism. Both of these factions and their elements make up a portion of the modern Japanese identity.
It was a political embarrassment as well, because when just Japan was on the point of becoming a member of the advanced industrialized nations whom we have copied so doggedly all those years. And then here comes this writer and killing himself as if the clock were put back 2 centuries.
As many Japanese children do today, with as many Western books, even more Western books as part of their education than Japanese book. Treasure Island is as well known to a Japanese child as it is to any English child.
Shin Megami Tensei presents these elements in conflict with each other, and asks you, the Japanese individual playing, to pick one best fits Japan's future. However, Shin Megami Tensei presents its own argument against these influences, which is one of balance and acceptance. The figure of balance that the game presents you with is Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu. In-game, he acknowledges the true advantages that both lore and chaos present, but also sees their potential for extreme consequences. The real life Lao Tzu had many sayings on people's anxieties regarding who they were and where they go in life, in which he stated that self-acceptance and acceptance of the world would lead to true happiness. This, overall, is the argument that Shin Megami Tensei presents. Accept the nature of the world and yourself. Forcing things will only bring suffering. Although this argument of equilibrium is the personal argument that the game presents, it is not the one that you need to accept. If you wish to shape the world under the ideology of law or chaos, you are entirely free to do so. This is the real power of Shin Megami Tensei. It doesn't force you into submitting to its way of thinking. The message of the game is yours to choose. Your national and political identity is yours to choose. Since the game is set in the real contemporary setting of Tokyo, and its world and characters are so heavily based on real-world politics and culture, the weight of the game has a significance that is difficult to compare to any other game. This impact that the game can have does feel partially lost on a non-Japanese player, I feel, as it was truly meant for a Japanese audience. Like the myths that it borrows from, Shin Megami Tensei has more than a singular layer of meaning. In coordination with the concept of seeking political and cultural identity, it also has a strong narrative around the life of the typical person in modern society. You start out as a kid who's still going to school, where the only major responsibility is running minor errands for your mother. Without your choice, the world rips you out of your comfortable life and thrusts you into the real world and its battles. Along the way, you make some loyal friends who share the same thoughts and ideas as you. Seeing her child grow up, your mother attempts to stop you before you can leave her for good, but it's too late. You've grown up. You're no longer a child anymore. If you go back to your home to seek the comfort of your mother, you find that she's permanently gone. This is the real world, and you have to commit to a choice and figure out what you want to do and where you belong. None of the choices seem especially great, but there's no other options other than to pick one of them. On your journey to figure out your place in the world, you find a girl who you can get along with. As time goes on, you and your friends change. You feel differently about things, different priorities in life. Eventually, your friendship dissolves and you go your separate ways. Now the only friend you have left is your partner. At this point, you've decided on the future for the next generation, and your path is set on enacting said goal. Once you've paved the way for future generations, your time on Earth is up. The events of your life flash before your eyes, and then your existence is over. I think it's quite telling that Shin Megami Tensei was produced at the beginning of Japan's lost decade. A game that consists of finding your own truth in what your identity is, and what you should do next in life is perfectly suited for Japan's lost generation. In a sense, Shin Megami Tensei is a kind of modern mythological tale. A sort of exemplar for young people of the world, translated into this fictional video game format.